Thank you so much. I can't actually see the chat because I didn't figure out all the tech stuff beforehand, so that's my bad. But please do put any questions or anything that you have in the chat as we're going through, and then we'll come back to them at the end for the Q&A session. And I want to try and make this as interactive as possible. So there will be some moments where I will sort of like ask a question and then ask you guys to put the answers in the chat. And then Danny, if you can just read out what's there, that would be really helpful. Okay, so let's get things kicked off. So over the next sort of 60 minutes, slightly under 60 minutes, I want to leave you guys with something that's actionable and tangible that you can take away. I've been to countless like webinars and events and things like this, and oftentimes I go and I'm like, okay, the content was amazing. I feel really motivated, really inspired, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do that thing. I'm gonna do this thing, and then you know what, life happens, and you never end up doing it. So what I always say to people is try to commit to at least one thing that you will take away from this session that you will actually do, and hold yourself accountable, but also maybe tell someone else so that they can hold you accountable as well, so that you're more likely to do it. So just one thing that you take away from today where you actually action it and do something that benefits you. Okay, so just tell us a little bit about yourself in the chat. Obviously, some of you have already been telling us who you are in terms of your name, but question for you, have you started investing already? And you can say things like, yes, I've started, I've got an ISA, I've got a pension, or no, I haven't. Yeah, I just want to get a sense for the sort of experience of everybody that we've got on the call. And Danny, if you can just let me know like what people are saying so I get a sense.
Yep, will do.
Don't be shy.
Please let us know. Have you started investing? We might give people a chance to type it out.
You can just put yes, no, a bit, a lot, none, like no right or wrong answer.
Dan says no, she hasn't. Hadi says yes, I've started. She has an SNS and an ISA. SNS ISA.
Okay.
SNS and ISA.
Yeah, stocks and shares ISA, yeah.
Yep. Rennie says yes, she has an ICA. Anika says she has an ICA and a pension.
Okay, cool. All right, this is that's great because sometimes I do webinars and like no one has invested, and you know, as you'll come on to see, like my whole thing, my whole purpose, my whole mission, everything that I do is about getting more women investing. So if you're one of the women that haven't started, absolutely fine, like don't worry. There are but there are things that you can do to get going and to get started. There's more I could say, but it's going to come in the slides coming up, so I won't give it away too early. Okay, so let's get into it. So we're going to start off with a little introduction. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about Propelle. Then we're going to start talking about why it's so important to invest, but why it's even more important for women to invest. We're going to look at some of the key considerations and tips and things that you can do to get started. And then we're going to talk about how you can get started right now. So again, going back to that point that I said about things being actionable and tangible that you can actually do, we're going to give you things that you can literally start doing today or tomorrow. And then we're going to open it up with Q&A. So as I said, any questions or anything that comes as I'm going through, pop them down in the chat, because sometimes what I find is you might have a question early on, but then because you get so involved in the content, by the time you get to the Q&A, you're like, oh gosh, what was my question? So if it comes into your head, pop it into the chat. Okay, so who am I? I am Ayesha Ofori. I am the founder and CEO of Propelle. I say my previous life, I was a banker. So I was a banker for about 10 years. Started off at a company called Morgan Stanley, working in their investment banking division. Then I went to business school and did a 2-year MBA. And then I ended up at Goldman Sachs, where I was an ultra high net wealth advisor. I was at Goldman for just over 6 years. And my role at Goldman was to go out and find clients, to bring their money in and then manage that money for them. So I would be deciding, you know, what investments and things that I would be making on behalf of my clients, and I would manage their money for them. Altogether, I built up a book starting from zero, and I built it up to just over £500 million that I managed across various different types of investments for my clients. And that was going amazingly well. But I got to a point in my life where I realized that the clients that I had at that point at Goldman were literally incredibly rich, predominantly white men. And it really shouldn't have taken me 6 years, but I kind of had this epiphany and I was like, what am I doing? I'm helping people who arguably don't really need that much help. And then I was sort of like, well, where are the women? Why don't we have female clients? Went down the rabbit hole. What I realized is women don't invest enough. And if I have the ability to help people build wealth and to do it in a meaningful way, then I want to help people who need it. And that's essentially what led me to Propelle. So, what is Propelle? Propelle is the UK's first and currently only female focused investment platform. Our whole mission is around helping women to build confidence, to have that what I call money and investing confidence. So when you're going out there and like you're like, yeah, I'm going to invest in this, or I'm going to do this, that you feel like, yeah, I got it. I know what I'm talking about. I feel confident with the decision that I'm making. So it's about helping women build confidence. And we do that a lot through education. So by running sessions like this, we have a lot of in-app content that we've constructed into courses. A lot of that I wrote myself. It was really sort of like distilling some of the learnings that I had from Goldman, from seeing how people build wealth, and taking those lessons and putting it into a format that is applicable and helpful to what I call like everyday women like me. And then also we're really big on community. A lot of women have told me like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm so alone. I'm not doing enough. I haven't started. Like everyone else has got their shit together. Excuse my language. I do swear occasionally. As I said, I was raised in a bank, so it's something I'm trying to unlearn. Um, and so sometimes a lot of women are like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm alone. And so the community is really important. A, because we're not alone. I meet so many women from different walks of life, whether it's, we work with the NHS right up to even we have women who are in financial services who you would assume know what they're doing. I find that a lot of women say the same thing. So just coming together, knowing that we're not alone, we can build wealth together. There's no reason why this person can't build wealth and that person can't build wealth. It is something we can do together and it's more fun. And also, you know what? Men do it. So many men have WhatsApp groups, communities where they're swapping investment ideas and things like this. And I'm like, as women, we need to do that more too. So that is also what Propel's about. And then the final piece is the investment part of our app, where you can actually go in, you can open a stocks and shares ISA, you can choose from a selection of funds. Some of you might be thinking, what the hell is she talking about? What's an ISA? What's a fund? I will come into that in a couple of pages. But essentially, Propel is all about financial education to build confidence, community, and investing. And you can see the QR code down there if you haven't downloaded the app already, or you can just look at it, find it through the App Store or the Google Play Store. Okay, so why is it important to invest? So the gender ISA gap in the UK is 6.6 billion. So this means that men's ISAs are worth £3,000 more on average. Now, before we even delve into that statistic, there's another statistic that I talk about that I think is even more powerful. And it's that the gender investment gap in the UK stands at £1.65 trillion. So that is essentially how much more money men have from investments than women. And what that then leads on to, or is a contributing factor, is to the gender pension gap. So the gender pension gap in the UK is 40%, which for me is mind-boggling. It's double the pay gap, but it doesn't get anywhere near as much airtime. Very few people talk about it as much. But what it means is that significant numbers of women who get to retirement age will not have enough money to see them comfortably through to the end of their life. And a lot of women think, oh, that's not me. I work. I have a workplace pension. The statistics apply to those women. It is to working women who have workplace pensions. The problem is the pensions won't be enough. And so a lot of people get into this habit of thinking, oh, I'm good. I work. I have a workplace pension. Oh, yeah, the government will give me some money. There's a state pension. Whereas actually, when you look at the numbers, I think the state pension is like £230 a week. Like, what the hell is that going to do for you? Particularly with inflation the way it is. So what I always say to people is, it's great if you have pensions, but it's not enough. These gaps exist, and the only way that we can close those gaps is if we do something about it for ourselves. Now, the great news is that statistically, when we do invest, we're better than men. Which is to me is unsurprising. So when we invest, we're actually better than men. But the issue is we don't invest enough. As women, what we tend to do is sit in cash. So if you go back to that statistic about the gender ISA gap and the difference, it really comes down to the fact that women tend to hold cash ISAs. And from my perspective, a cash ISA is not investing. If you hold a cash ISA, you are saving. Whereas men tend to hold stocks and shares ISAs. So ISAs where you can invest in stocks and shares, that's what I classify as investing. So many women sometimes say to me, yeah, I have an ISA, I'm investing. And I say, okay, cool. What's your ISA? They're like, oh yeah, I have a cash ISA. That's not really investing, that's saving. Stocks and shares ISA is what I would classify as investing. So one of the things that we focused on is really helping women to understand the difference, but then also thinking, okay, absolutely, I need to hold some cash, but you don't want to hold too much cash. So it's about helping people to understand, right, how much cash do I need to hold? And then how much of the rest of it should I be investing? And we'll come on to some more of the details of that. So as I mentioned before, when we do invest, we do it better than men. So here it's telling us that, yeah, although 91% of women think men are better, we actually outperform them. Now, there are so many different reasons that we've uncovered through our research at Propel as to why women don't invest, as why people don't invest. And you can see some of the, I guess, common sort of what we call money attitudes here on the screen. So some people say investing is risky, or investing is not for me, or it's just for rich people, or oh, it's only for people who are greedy, who want to get money. We hear people say often, oh, I'm just not good with money, I don't know what I'm doing. Talking about money is rude. You know, I think it's also quite a for those of you in the UK, it's a bit of a British thing. Like, oh, we never talk about money. We don't tell people like how much we earn or talk about investing or anything like that. But actually, I say we have to change that. We need to be more open. We have to be sharing this stuff with each other because it helps all of us to move forward. And as I said before, men are doing it. Even if I take my husband as an example, he's got so many different WhatsApp groups with his male friends where they're talking about, oh, how much are you earning? Oh, we're doing similar things. Maybe I should ask for a pay rise, or you're investing in this. Maybe I should look at that. Those are the types of conversations that we need to start having and start to become more comfortable with. But I think one of the sort of starting points when it comes to investing is to think about some of your money attitudes that you might have, and also some of what I call inherited beliefs. So, you know, when I was growing up in my family, I realized that I got older, there were certain money habits and things that I basically inherited from my mother, which aren't helpful. But in order for me to really break free from those, I had to first A, acknowledge them, and then B, understand what they were. So, for example, my mother has a fear of debt. When she was growing up, it was just all about cash. Never borrow money from anyone or anything. Like, it's a terrible thing. So she well thought and still thinks like credit cards are evil. So you might think that's great, but actually, if you don't build up a credit profile, it can actually bite you later. So, for example, if you're trying to get a mortgage, one of the things that they will do is look at your credit history. Do you have a steady pattern where you have the ability to, or where you've shown you have the ability to keep making repayments? If you've never got a credit card, there are other ways to build up your credit profile, but a credit card is one of the easiest ways. So for me, thinking, oh, credit is bad and all this stuff is bad, listening to my mother, actually, it did become a problem at some point because the only sort of credit history I had was paying my mobile phone bill, which does count, but on its own, it wasn't particularly strong. So when I started to realize some of this stuff, I'm like, I'm absolutely going to get a credit card. And you don't have to get a big one, like just get a small credit card with maybe a credit facility of like £100, £200. Use it often. Make sure you're paying off the balance every month, just to build up a credit score to show people that you can be loaned money because it can benefit you later in life. But that was just an example of one of the, I say, habits I inherited from my mum. Have a think about the habits that you might have inherited from people around you when you were growing up. I know some of my friends were made to feel that, particularly my friends who were Black, were made to feel that, you know, any money that they were earning was actually for the family, and they had to, you know, loan money to whether it's their parents or their siblings, or to send money back home. And it was sort of like their success was actually the success of everyone. And so even though they were doing well, they didn't really have any money to put to the side to invest, because they were also supporting everybody else. And then when you think about how that sort of plays out later in life, it can also impact how you think about investing, because some people are still doing that. So it's really important to think about your own situation, what money attitudes or habits or beliefs or anything that might be holding you back, and then have a look at how you can then move forward. So what we typically tend to say to people is, first of all, identify what we call your money story. Reflect on memories, note down any common emotions that you have or anything that you associate with money. And the interesting thing is our core money behaviors are actually formed by age 7. And so it really will be things that happen to you as a child, subconsciously at school, all this information that you are absorbing. Those are the things that have shaped the money behaviors that you now have as an adult. And it's important to recognize these patterns so that you can understand what holds you back and how to replace them, how to challenge it or reframe any limiting beliefs. And you don't have to do this all overnight, right? One of my key mottos when it comes to investing is just small and steady steps. So take small empowering actions that can help you overcome any of those barriers if you identify that you have any. And then also just surround yourself with positive influences. There are so many like money and investing, particularly female focused communities out there. We have obviously a community in Propelle, but there are others out there. Find the one that works for you. I would love for you all to join Propelle, but if you find that another one is better for you, that's absolutely fine. Go to what works for you. Be patient. You know, this takes time. There is no such thing as a get rich quick scheme. But if you are consistent, if you are focused and you keep doing it over time, you will see success. So why is it important to invest? And then on the next slide, we'll talk about particularly why it's important for women to invest. Well, we're all living longer. So we're going to be more reliant on our pensions. So at the point at which we retire, we need to make sure that we have enough money to see us through to the end of our life. Otherwise, you're going to have to work until God knows what age. Inflation. Inflation is a silent killer of money. Inflation basically erodes what you can buy with your money. And one of the frustrating things about holding cash in a bank account is, let's say I put, I don't know, £10,000 in like a high street savings account. You might keep looking at that account every so often and you're looking at it and you're like, yeah, my £10,000 is there. Okay, fine. You look at it again. Oh, my £10,000 is there. Okay, fine. Yeah, but it's not fine because you need to think about inflation. Although you still see the same number, what you can buy with that £10,000 is a lot less. And I kind of think of it like I go to my local supermarket and literally like I'd say even 2 years ago, I could spend sort of like £50 and I could probably walk away with like, I don't know, 2 bags, maybe 2.5 bags of shopping. Now I go to the supermarket, I spend £50. I'm lucky if I fill 1 bag. I'm like, what on earth is going on? Inflation. Things are becoming more expensive. So if your money is sat in cash and it is not growing, at least in line with inflation, but ideally higher, then actually your money is being eroded, even though you still see the same number. Investing works because of something called compounding. Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world. We're going to go into a bit more detail on compounding in a couple of slides. So that's all I want to say on that. But that is why investing works. Compounding is what is key. And compounding only works if you start, if you stay consistent, and if you do it for the long term. And as I said, we'll come back to that. And then another reason why you might want to invest is maybe you want to leave something behind for the generations that are coming after you. You absolutely don't have to, it's obviously a personal choice. But again, growing up, I know friends, for example, whose parents were able to give them money to pay for them to go to university. I had to take out a student loan. I know people whose parents helped them get on the property ladder when they started. I had to do it all by myself. So for me, I think about how can we break some of these cycles that we've been seeing generation after generation, particularly within the Black community? So like when I look at my friends who are Jewish or my friends who are Indians, there's a lot of like family support, community support. And when I think, right, how can I change things for the next generation, for my girls, for my children? And it's like, right, maybe I can help them through university so they don't have to take out a loan. Maybe I can help them get on the property ladder. So I need to start amassing my wealth so I can think about how I can help them because I want the generations to change. As a community, things will only change if A, we help ourselves, but also we do need to think about the generations that come next as well. So why is investing particularly important for women? So we all heard of the gender pay gap. So we know that we get paid less than men. Women we are the ones who, if we choose to have children, we tend to be the ones who are the main carers. So we take time out then. Obviously, we take time out during maternity leave and things like this. But we're also the carers, or tend to be the carers for elderly relatives as well. Menopause is another point at which a lot of women take time off work. Some women leave work altogether, which really impacts their earning potential. So when you think about it all, we have less money to start with. We're likely to be in the workplace for less time, so we earn less money, but we live longer. So I'm like, right, we have less money, we're not investing as much as men, so we're not making that money work hard, but it has to last us longer. Well, that doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't work. And when you look at the data, the numbers tell us it doesn't work. As I said, the gender investment gap is 1.65 trillion pounds. The gender ISA gap, 6.6 billion pounds. Gender pension gap, 40%. We have to change something. Now, the good news is that it's actually, in my opinion, relatively easy to change, but because the industry is so full of jargon, and I think there's so much education out there now, we almost get overwhelmed. It's just like, oh my God, where do I start? I don't even know where to begin. And so a lot of women are like, okay, yeah, I'll do it later. I'll do it later. And later never comes. So you have to commit to yourself that actually, I want to make a difference here. I want to build financial freedom for myself, and it is absolutely possible. That's another thing. People say, oh, if I invest, is it really going to move the needle for me? Like, what's the point of just investing this much if it's only going to do this and not really help me to make a meaningful difference in my life? If you invest consistently and you do it for the long term, it will move the needle. I think part of the problem today is that in society, we just want instant gratification. Like, I'm one of those people. I start watching a Netflix series and I'm like, okay, one episode, one episode. Like 6 hours later, my eyes are burning and I've watched the whole thing because I want it all now. And I think sometimes when it comes to investing, people are a bit like that. They invest today and they want to be rich next week. It doesn't work that way. But over time, it can make a huge difference to your life and it can get you to financial freedom. Now, financial freedom will mean so many different things for so many different people. But that's the great thing about investing. You create your strategy to help you get to where you want. So now we want to talk a bit more about compounding and why investing works. I've got a couple of slides here on it that I want to walk through with you. And these are some of the most powerful slides that I always use in my presentation because the messages that they just deliver are just so fundamental. So if we have a look at the slide here, we've got three different lines representing three different people. So Jack is blue, Jill is green, and Joey is red. So Jack starts investing at age 25. He invests, we're going to call it pounds instead of dollars. He invests £200 a month starting at 25. He invests all the way to 65. So he invests for 40 years and he contributes a total of £96,000. So over that 40-year investment period, he puts in £96,000. And at the end of that time, that money has grown to just over £500,000. And we've assumed that when he's investing, he's just earning 7% a year. In today's market, 7% is actually low. I'd say, they say like the historically equity markets typically perform around 8% per year. I mean, I know some of the funds on the Propelle platform have been delivering between like 12 and 14. So 7 is actually pretty low. But even at 7, he managed to turn £96,000 into over £500,000, investing over a 40-year period, but investing every month. So it was the consistency. Have a look at Jill. Jill starts at 35. She also invests to 65. So she invests for 10 years less. She only invests for 30 years. Altogether, she puts in £72,000 and her wealth grows to around £250,000. So the interesting thing there is she started 10 years later and she only manages to amass half as much as Jack. So what it shows you is that delaying, even by 10 years, has an impact. So the moral here, start as soon as you can. And then if you look at Joey, Joey starts at 45 and only invests for 20 years until 65, also putting in £200 a month. Joey puts in altogether £48,000, and that £48,000 grows to £100,000. So Joey ends up with 100,000, but Jack gets over 500,000. Why? Because he started earlier. So compound interest works when you start as early as possible. And if you have a look at those lines on the chart, they're not straight lines, right? Jack's line goes up like that. So typically what you see with investing is in the early years, yeah, you make some money, but it's really those later years that the graph really shoots up. And that's when it starts to accumulate even more money at a faster rate. So I always say to people with investing, you do have to be patient, but it works. Like you can see that you can build wealth this way. And it's really as the graph starts to shoot up, that's where you start to see it happening. But oftentimes people are like, oh, I want it now. I've been investing for 3 years. I'm not seeing that much. And I'm like, just be patient. So this chart here, yeah, I mean, I love all of these ones. But in this one, Jack invests, again, Jack the blue line invests £200 a month. In fact, this one is even more powerful than the first one. So Jack starts investing at 25, same as before. He invests £200 a month, but he only invests for 10 years. He only invests between the ages of 25 and 35. Then he stops investing and does not invest any more money. So altogether, he's only put in £24,000, right? So he only puts in £24,000 between the ages of 25 and 35. And then over time, that manages to grow to just below £300,000. Now let's look at Jill, the green line. Jill invests also £200 a month. She starts at 35 and she continues to 65. So she invests for 30 years, whereas Jack only invested for 10. But although she invested for 30 years, he still manages to accumulate more than her. So just let that sink in, because this chart usually blows a lot of people's minds. It's like, hold on a second. This guy only invested for 10 years between the ages of 25 and 35. Poor Jill invested for 30 years. How does she end up with less money than him? It's the power of compounding and how it works. Because the earlier you start investing, you start earning interest on that interest in the early days. Whereas because Jill started later, she missed out on that. So although she invested consistently once she started, because she missed out on those early years, she still ends up with less. So what is really important to note here is start investing as soon as you possibly can, even if you have to stop. Remember, Jack only did it for 10 years, started at 25, stopped at 35, but he still manages to accumulate more than Jill, who invested for 30 years. So sometimes people say to me, like, okay, I'm going to start investing, and life happens, and they might change a job or something, and they're like, oh, I can't continue. That's okay. Just start, be as consistent as you can. If something in life happens that disrupts it for a little bit, that's okay. Life happens. But then as soon as you can get back on track, get back on track. And then this final graph on compounding shows us what happens if we can increase the contributions that we make. So the blue line shows what happens if you just invest consistently at £200 a month. You invest £200 a month, but you also increase it then by 5% each year. Whereas the yellow line shows what happens if you do a flat £200 a month and you never increase it. So if you increase by 5% each year, in this 40-year time horizon here, the pot has managed to grow to over £1 million, whereas if you're just doing a flat contribution, you're just at £500,000. So the moral of this slide is, if you can increase your monthly contributions, absolutely do so. So one of the features that we have in the Propelle app is we allow people to set up recurring payments. So you can either go in and say, right, I've got this much money to start with. I want to invest this lump sum now. And then I want to do £50 a month, £100 a month, £500 a month, £1,000 a month, whatever it is that you can afford. But it's so important to get into that habit about investing regularly. Like, you want to be doing this in a way where you don't even have to think about it. So like, you're basically investing and building wealth in your sleep. And it's about, again, starting as soon as possible, staying consistent and being invested for the long term, because that's how you get the benefits of compounding. So, what are some of the key things that you need to think about and understand when it comes to investing? Now, there is so much out there. There's so many things that you could learn about investing and different topics and crypto and property and yeah. And I totally understand why people find it overwhelming. But there are some key fundamental principles that are much easier to digest. There are only a few topics that you can absolutely get on top of, and that is enough for most people to get the basics right. And what I say to people is you need to focus on those basics first. Get the basics right. It's like building a house. You want to do your foundations first before you start building the walls and a fancy roof and everything else. So get the basics right first. Once you have the basics right, if you have the appetite and you have the money, then you can start looking at riskier things. Then you might want to add in a bit of property investing or a bit of startup investing or a bit of crypto or a bit of whatever it is, but get the basics right. So what do I mean by the basics? For me, they fall under three sort of topic areas, which I'm going to cover now. One is diversification. The other is looking at active investing versus passive investing, and then tax efficient investing. For me, whenever you invest, it should always be as tax efficient as possible. Why do you want to give more money to the tax man than you need to? There are also some tax incentive investments out there where you invest and you get benefits. To me, that's just like getting free money. So when people always say to me, oh my gosh, where do I start with investing? Well, the tax efficient ones first. Once you've maxed out all your tax allowances, then start to look at other things. So what do I mean by diversification? Diversification is basically not having all your eggs in one basket. It's about making sure that when you invest, you have enough of a mix so that if one sort of investment or one asset class doesn't do very well, you've got some money in other places, so it kind of like balances everything out. Now, typically, when I say to people like, "Oh, what are your investments in? Are you diversified?" They're like, "Yeah. I've got some cash, I've got some bonds, and I've got some stocks and shares." And I'm like, okay, cool. That's three things. There is some element of diversification there. And actually, that's great diversification when you're working on getting your basics right. But what I've noticed about wealthy people, particularly with a lot of the clients that I've had at Goldman and people that I've met since then, is when they diversify, their diversification is to a next level. So you can see with the chart on the right, we've written how the 1% invest. Yes, they have some stocks and shares. Yes, they have cash. Yes, they have bonds like everybody else. But they also have property. They also have some private equity. They might have some hedge funds. They might have some crypto. They might have some art, some wine, whatever it is. So what I say to people is, right, when you think about building your wealth, think about it in this way. So think of like a core circle like this. And I call this the core. This is where most of your money goes. So like, I don't know, 80 to 90% of your money will go into that core. In that core, you typically find those three things like in the chart on the left: cash, stocks, and bonds, what I call the vanilla stuff. Then around your core layer, you have what I call a satellite layer. The satellite layer goes around the core, right? So most of your wealth, say 80 to 90% is in this core. Then the rest of it, the sort of 10 to 20% goes in that satellite layer. In that satellite layer, that's where you do the more riskier, funky stuff. That's where you'll get your property. That's where you'll put your private equity, your startup investing, your hedge fund, your wine, your art, whatever else it is. So focus on the core first. Get the core right. Once you've done the core, as I said, if you have the risk appetite and you have the money, then start to think about those other layers. Sometimes I see people just focus on the layers because they're like, right, if I just invest in property or crypto, then I'm going to get rich faster. I don't think I've ever seen that work. Now, sometimes people build their core and the satellite at the same time. That's absolutely fine. You might be investing in, say, a stocks and shares ISA, a diversified fund in that in your core, whilst doing a bit of property investing, whilst doing a bit of startup investing. That's absolutely fine. But don't just focus on the satellite layer. You have to get that core right. And diversification is important because it allows you to spread your risk, whether it's political risk, economic risk, or currency risk. The second bucket I said I talk about is active investing versus passive investing. So active investing is pretty much, you know, what it says on the tin. It's where you are hands-on, where you are doing something. You are actively managing your money yourself. Now, I don't know why anyone would choose active investing unless you have time, you were sat at home, you were teaching yourself to become an expert, and then you're going to be managing your money. Um, I see online all the time people like, oh yeah, come invest in this FX stuff, or here are my trades, follow me. And I'm just like, that's so bad. I like when I was getting into Goldman, I had to go through so many exams to be able to become a wealth advisor. I used to see the exams that the traders have to do. Like it's not like it's not easy. There are things that you need to learn to be able to invest and trade in that way. So when I see people online saying, hey, yeah, it's easy, just come follow me or do it, I'm like, no, it really isn't that easy. So if you don't have the knowledge, the time, or the inclination to become an expert, then I really don't understand why people choose active investing. However, if you have the time, you're willing to put the time and effort in, and you can learn, then it is a strategy for you. So some examples of investing is like stock picking. So somebody might say, oh yeah, I'm going to go buy Apple stock, or I'm going to buy Tesla. And I understand that some people do it because just emotionally they like the company. But from an investment standpoint, I say to them, have you looked at the annual accounts? And even when you get the annual accounts, in accounting, it's you can call numbers clean or dirty because sometimes companies put all kinds of things into their accounts. So you can't even really look at the accounts unless you clean the numbers. So then I say to people, do you know how to clean? Because I remember learning how to clean numbers, and it's pretty tricky. So then when I see people picking stocks, I'm like, but you're not even doing the fundamental analysis that you should be doing to really be able to pick those stocks. If you're just doing it from an emotional perspective, oh, I like Apple, so I'm just going to buy Apple. Okay, that's fine. But I wouldn't call that investing. That's more just like you're taking a punt. It might be a sort of educated punt to some extent, but you haven't really done the homework. Same with currency trading. Again, unless you're an expert, I just don't see how people sit at home and think they can do this every day. So, what is the alternative? The alternative is passive investing. It's where you can maximize returns, but with putting in little effort yourself. And for me, this is the strategy that works. It's about making money while you sleep. You will have jobs, you're working somewhere else. Yes, you're working to bring in that initial money that you can then put to work in investments, but then let the experts manage that money. And when I say experts, it can be an investment platform, it could be a financial advisor. Like you pick what works for you. That said, with financial advisors, I personally don't think financial advisors make sense for everyone because of the cost. I'd say only once you get to a certain wealth level, you might think about having a financial advisor. Otherwise, there are so many platforms and tools out there to help you build an investment portfolio yourself. And it's done in a passive way, so you don't have to necessarily put in that much time and effort yourself. So, what do I mean by passive? Buy and hold share strategies, robo advisors, so some of the investment platforms, or investing in funds. Funds are something that I really love to talk about because I think it's a great, easy way to get investing. So on the Propelle platform, we offer funds. This is what you can invest into your ISA with. And we have 7 funds from 3 big fund managers, Vanguard, BlackRock, and HSBC. So the way that it works is, say you want to invest in a fund, you choose the fund that you want to invest in, you put your money into it, but then those companies have experts who sit there all day, every day, within working hours, making the decisions about what are the underlying investments in these funds, what do we need to be changing, what do we need to be doing. And for me, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. That's their day job. Let them manage my money and do it on a day-to-day basis while I'm out here doing my day job, making the money to invest. But the people who are like, yeah, I'm going to go out and work and earn money, and I'm also going to manage my own money and pick my own stocks, and I'm just like, how can you really do that well? So for me, passive investing is a way to invest where it's not taxing on you, but you can still get, the most out of it. So I've mentioned a fund and I explained briefly some of the fund managers that we work with, but what is a fund? People ask this all the time. And because it's what I think is one of the key things that goes into the core, I'd like to spend a little bit more time on this. So a fund is basically where you invest, other people invest, and so all that money is pulled together. And in that one fund, the fund managers, let's take Vanguard, for example, the fund managers at Vanguard, when all that money comes in, will decide what to invest in. And in any one fund, there might be like 26,000 underlying investments. So rather than you saying, hey, here's my money, let me go and pick these 26,000 things myself, which you would never be able to do. They have fund managers who do that for you, and they do it at scale. So it's an easy way to get great diversification, to have an expert manage your money. So this is why I'm a massive proponent of funds. And here you can see, as I said, we work with Vanguard, BlackRock. We've even got a Sharia fund for Muslim women from HSBC. And the way that the funds vary is, for example, if you look at Vanguard, it might say 20% equity, 60% equity, 100% equity. That is how much equity or debt is in the fund. So with a 20% equity Vanguard fund, there is 20% of equity, so 20% stocks and shares, 80% bonds. With 60% equity, 60% is stocks and shares, 40% bonds. 100% equity is just equity, there are no bonds. And which one you choose will depend on your risk profile, but also on how much you're looking to make. What return do you want? And risk and return are basically two different sides of the same coin. They come together. So typically, if something is giving you a higher return, it's because you're taking a higher level of risk. So sometimes when people come to me and they're like, yeah, I don't, my risk tolerance is low, I don't want to take any risk, but I want a 15% return. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't work. If you want a 15% return, then you're going to have to take the equivalent of 15% return type of risk. Higher return, higher risk, lower return, lower risk. However, you can reduce the risk that you take by investing over the long term. And there's a slide on this that's coming up, and I'll mention that again. So the third bucket that I mentioned earlier was tax efficient investing. One of the main ways to invest tax efficiently is through an ISA. You get a £20,000 annual limit for a cash ISA or stocks and shares ISA, and you can invest up to £20,000 every year, and all the profits that you make are tax free. So imagine investing in an ISA over 10, 20, 30 years. Remember that graph that I showed you, and you don't have to pay any tax on it at all. So when people always say to me, where do I start investing and things like this? I'm like, do you have an ISA? Some people say, yes, great. Have you maxed out your ISA? Are you hitting that £20,000 limit yet? No, not yet. Okay, that's something to work towards. Once you've started to reach the £20,000 threshold, then it's like, okay, what other things can I be investing in? Should I be investing in property? Or I still want to invest in stocks and shares. I'll just do it outside my ISA. That's absolutely fine. But for me, ISAs is definitely the best place to start. This is the graph that I kind of alluded to earlier about risk. It's so important to think about risk because people are always like, oh, women are risk averse, women are risk averse. I don't believe that. I say women are risk aware. We want to know what the risks are. We want the information, but if you give us the information, we still might go ahead with that investment. It's just that most of the time we're not getting the information in a way that's digestible. Men are more likely to jump in, and that's probably why women live longer than men, because men do stupid things. But men are more likely to jump in without having all the information, whereas data tells us that women want the information first. The interesting thing is, let's take this example, the S&P 500. What this graph shows us is if you invested in the S&P 500 for 1 month, your probability of loss is 38%. And you can see that in the red. That's pretty high. If you invest in the same thing, the same S&P 500, but you do it for 10 years, your loss has dropped to just, or your probability of loss has dropped to just 5%. If you invest in the S&P 500 for, say, 15 years, your probability of loss drops to 0.2%. So the chance of you losing money if you invest for 15 years is 0.2%. So when people say to me, investing is risky, well, my response is, how long are you investing for? If you invest for 1 month, yeah. 1 year, yeah. 10 years? Nah, I wouldn't say so. 15 years? I mean, no, look at the numbers. And this is the same investment. So one way to reduce your risk is through diversification. For example, investing in a fund that has lots of things in it. Then another way to reduce your risk even further is to invest for longer periods of time. So imagine if you invest in like a global diversified Vanguard fund for 15 years, you've reduced your risk through diversification, and then you're reducing it again by the length of time that you're investing. It's so important. So how can you get started today? It's important to do some research. As I said, there are lots of different platforms out there, some similarities, some differences. I think the main things to look at is what are they offering you? What is it that you're investing in? Are these legitimate funds or big fund managers? What are the fees? You need to make sure you're not paying higher fees than you need to. And then you also need to check on like whether an investment is suitable for you. Now, the thing that blows my mind is some of these platforms out there, they don't really do that. Like you can go to the platform and it'll be like, yeah, choose a fund. A lot of people are like, well, how the hell do I know what fund to choose? So with the Propel platform, we've built certain tools and features into the journey to be able to make that decision for you. And we actually say by the time you get to the page where you have to choose a fund, if you don't confidently know how to choose a fund by seeing everything else that you've gone through, then let us know because we've designed it to be able to help you to make these decisions for yourself. As I said earlier, most people can't afford a financial advisor or shouldn't even have one because the fees don't make sense. So the whole purpose of our platform was right. How can we give you the tools and the knowledge to be able to confidently make these decisions for yourself? You also find a like-minded community, share, talk to women, as it says here, engage, talk, listen, and learn. I'm a massive proponent of doing what I call of learning by doing, earn and learn. The best way to learn is to get started. Start small, and then you can build up over time. So I'm a big fan of having roadmaps, having plans and lists. I write everything down. If I'm going to leave you with anything, here are sort of 5 key things for you to think about. And remember, I said I wanted you to take away one thing from today. So it could be something on this slide, or it could be something that I've spoken about already. When it comes to thinking about how much money to put towards an investment, and this is another question I always get, how much do I invest? First of all, you need to start with your emergency fund. This is the pot of money that will sit in cash. This money will not be invested, it will stay in cash. Emergency funds are typically either 3 months of living expenses, 6 months of living expenses, for some people, 12 months of living expenses. So if there's an emergency, you lose your job or something happens to your partner, whatever, you're okay because you have that money sits in cash. Any money outside of that investment, outside of that emergency fund, I would argue should be invested. And as I said at the very beginning, as women, we tend to hold too much cash. So once you've got your emergency fund, if you do not need to have any more cash in there, then really consider putting that excess cash towards investments. Calculate how much money you have to go towards the investment, how much can you start with, and how much can you invest on a monthly basis. Think about why you want to invest, set your goals. It's really important to understand your end goal. Why are you investing in the first place? It's kind of like going on a journey. You're not going to get in a car and drive to a place that you've never been without pulling up a Google map, right? Or at least I won't. So you need to think about your end destination in terms of your investments so you can build that map. Once you've thought about that, you need to think about your risk appetite, your risk capacity, and your risk tolerance. They all mean different things, but essentially you think about it like I tend to think of it in 2 buckets. You have what I call like your emotional risk, how you feel about how you feel about risk in investing, how much money you would feel comfortable losing. And then there's your financial risk, which is actually how much you can afford to lose. What we find with women is the gap between your emotional risk level and your financial risk level is actually really big. With men, it's much narrower. And this is something that as women, we have to actively work on. So even though, for example, let's say I have a great job, I'm earning a certain amount of money, I want to invest £5,000. Do you know what? If I lose that £5,000, not really going to make a difference to my life. So I should be investing potentially in riskier things and putting that money on the line, but I'm not going to do it because I think, oh God, I don't want to lose the £5,000. But actually, from a financial perspective, I can afford to invest that money. Therefore, I should be doing it. So we need to work on that gap. And one way of doing that, research, learning, get comfortable, start small, test it. The more you do it, the more confidence you grow, that grows with you. And then, as I said, if you're investing over the long term, you can significantly reduce the risk that's involved. So that is me. That is everything. I think we're coming up to about time anyway, so we have time for Q&A now. As I said, QR code is on the screen here. If you want to download the app, look at some of our content. or even use some of the goal setting tools to help you calculate how much you should be investing, what sorts of returns you should be looking for, what sorts of funds can give you those returns. And we have all of that in the app.